This has been an interesting week. Do you find that your hearts are troubled in this time that we're living in? Do you walk by people in the grocery store and notice where they are in a way you didn't before? Or when somebody sneezes around you, you wonder, do they have it? Are they safe? Am I? Has an activity that you love been canceled? Has something you normally attend gone away? These are anxious times. My heart is troubled. What does it take to have something grow? What does starting a seed from scratch require? Is it an easy process? It seems so. You take some dirt, you take some seeds, you follow the directions, and you plant them. You add some water, some sunlight, and you watch them grow. When the time comes, maybe you thin them out, lest you have too many in any one place. It seems like such a simple process to have something grow. But how many of you have ever killed a plant? There are 2 plants in the office right now that apparently I have killed. I bought a pot that was supposed to solve the problem of either having too much water or too little, and it failed. And I drowned them, and they died. Having something grow is not as easy as we might be led to believe. As I've thought about it, one of the hard things is that these seeds are only ever a promise of what might be. They aren't actually what is yet. They are seeds. And it's a promise that only emerges, as in the words of Scripture, these seeds fall into the ground and die. And even then, it has to be nurtured, right? Or what it will be will never emerge. Therein, I think, lies one of the true attractions of growing something. Tending a garden, tending a life. That if you find a way to just not mess it up too badly, then you're given a wonderful promise of what can be. And it just sort of emerges when you least expect it. And you are given the opportunity to marvel and wonder at its beauty. Enjoy the harvest. It's true of plants, of people, of life in general. In the lesson I just read, Jesus indicts a group of people, leaders in the Jewish faith in the area in which he's journeying to. He indicts them for the way in which they squander what has been so carefully tended and allowed to grow. The story is a parable. but it speaks of real life, of life for us here and now. The parable, of course, is about a vineyard. Any of you know anything about grapes? Yes. Grapes do best when they have to struggle a little. The complexity of the flavors that comes from grapes comes out better when they have to struggle on the vine a little bit. In the parable, the focus is on the ways that the stewards of the vineyard, the tenants, are trying to seize control over the harvest. The way that they mistreat the slaves of the vineyard owner, who's merely trying to harvest what is his. What portion of it is his, the text actually says. We're not told what the harvest is exactly or its intended purpose, but the focus is on the way in which, as described in the parable, God's own people are squandering what God is doing in their world by mistreatment, by inattention, anger even at those God sends to serve. It's a tough story. Those that are charged with taking care of the vineyard are so caught up in their own angst and greatness that they can focus on nothing else than trying to get what is not theirs. And all the while, the harvest that is possible only with God is missed by their inattention to what God is doing. They cause harm to not only God's own self, God's own servants, God's own Son, but as egregious is the way in which the harvest of God, the beauty that comes on display for them all, is squandered. Each year, for Christmas, for Easter, I like to have something to send home with children that come and worship here. This year, if you were here at Christmas, you'll remember that it was on our Christmas tree, right? On our Christmas tree this last year, I hung candy canes for kids to take home. It allowed us to talk about the various ornaments that were on that tree, the symbol of what a candy cane means, the shepherd's staff. My hope is less to give them a gift on those special occasions and more to give them a tangible reminder of what it is that happens here. That godly things happen here. And that especially for children, if they go home with something physical, a physical reminder of that, then they might remember. Candy canes are great, but my favorite thing has always been to give things to kids that grow. I've done pumpkins, sunflowers, bulbs at Christmas time. This time I thought that I would plant these, a wildflower hummingbird mix. And that we'll have something for kids to take home. That is the promise of something greater. So you see, this act of planting something is about preparing for a harvest that while I might be the one who plants it, I recognize that my tenancy, my being a tenant over it, is ultimately not what's important. That this planting of flowers or of whatever it might be is not about my vineyard, but about God's. About the harvest of faithfulness that can come forward in the world. It's hard to think about that at a time when we're supposed to be 6 feet away from one another. where we're supposed to be suspicious and cautious about our illnesses and that of others. One of the most challenging realities we face right now is to not be formed by our fears. This outbreak is awful. People are dying. And we need to do everything possible to ensure that we are finding new ways of being, of gathering, of staying safe. But we must also not let fear be that which guides us into new pathways of thinking and behaving. The synagogue leaders that Jesus encountered did that. Their behavior toward the world was as agents of a system they were fearful of that would bring them down. And so they began to try and control, prevent, stop everything that was outside of their control. And in so doing, they forgot to live forward to God's promised future for them and for the world. They forgot that they were not owners of all that was in the world, that it wasn't their responsibility to direct it, but to be stewards, to be tenants of what God has for them, so that God's vineyard might grow and produce a bountiful harvest for the world. That's our task today, in this extraordinary time that we live in. And so I plant. I plant for the harvest of beautiful children that I hope will come walking down this aisle on a glorious Easter day to celebrate the gift of love that comes through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus our Christ. And I invite you to plant as well. Literally, if you want. There aren't a lot of people at Plantland right now. You can plant your own flowers. You can plant your own way. Or you can do something else. This week I gave blood for the first time in many years, because it's going to be needed. You can still give food. If you have to go to the store, buy an extra can of beans or two. They haven't run out of those yet. Find ways to plant in this time. Everybody is so anxious, they're closing in on themselves. For the coronavirus may take away this moment in time. It can even take away our lives. But it cannot and must not ever take away how God's love is always blooming forth in our world, especially in our times of brokenness and pain. My heart is troubled at this time. I find that I'm worried about you and your health. A lot of you are a lot older than me. I find that I'm worried about what can be and will be. I hurt over those that lose their life to this pandemic. There's a word I didn't think I would hear. And I'm concerned about the next few weeks, 2 months, to however long it is. But I'm still planting. I'm planting flowers in hope that God's vineyard will again produce of itself, and that we will continue to live into the promise of what God has to offer. So plant with me, in your own way, shape, and form, however that may be. Let us live, however we must in the meantime, due to this nasty thing going around. But ever live for the glory and love of God, which is promised and real. Let us look for the love of God to once again bloom and flourish and grow in our midst. Let us live the promises we know to be real. That one fateful day, a man named Jesus died on the cross. And 3 days later, because God so loved our world, rose again. Amen.